This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse murder and their families. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 170, Arabella Parker, Retold, Part 2. In the last episode, I told you the first part of the story of 3-year-old Arabella Parker, who was rushed to the hospital on October 10, 2019, reportedly suffering from a seizure. Because medical staff wasn't told that the seizure resulted from severe head trauma, the damage was irreparable, and Arabella died on November 22, 2019. In this episode, I'll take you through the hearings and the trials of the 3 people accused of allowing, causing, or covering up the reason for Arabella's death: her mother, Samantha Delcamp, Samantha's boyfriend, Jahrid Burgess, and Jahrid's mother, Christy Willis. In the next episode, you'll hear my conversations with several people close to Arabella's case. This is part 2 of the complex, tragic story of Arabella Parker, Retold. Now, I'll pick up where I left off in the last episode. After Arabella died on November 22, 2019, the 2 sides of her family became bitterly embroiled in a battle over Arabella's funeral arrangements. Her aunt, Mandy Kegler's attorney, informed Mandy that both Carl and Samantha needed to sign off to allow Arabella to be cremated. Samantha agreed to the arrangement, but Carl refused to sign, saying he wanted his daughter buried instead. Mandy did have full legal custody of Arabella, but that expired when the little girl died, so a new hearing had to be held to appoint an administrator for the 3-year-old's estate. Anyone indicted for homicide did not have the right to be an administrator, which excluded Samantha from consideration, and a judge would have to decide if Carl, who was imprisoned, could serve as administrator. Because of this, funeral arrangements were delayed until a hearing could be held in December. Mandy said, "It is sickening that he can't agree and let his daughter be at rest. This child went through so much trauma that to even consider anything other than these arrangements should be out of the question." Mandy's sister, Sarah, added, "I don't understand why this is continuing to happen to us. We wanted to have a very special and private service for our niece, and we just want her to be at peace. Now we must wait again to see what will happen." At a court hearing on their homicide charges in December, Samantha waived her right to a preliminary hearing, but Jahrid requested a hearing and pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. During the proceeding, CYS worker Brittany Williams testified first, saying Arabella's brain injury was the worst brain injury I've ever seen in a child. Pennsylvania State Trooper Brian Siebert said Arabella's injuries were consistent with those incurred in a severe beating. District Attorney Tony Matalevich told the court that Jahrid created a culture of fear and abuse in that house. District Judge John Gembick said, "This is one of the most horrific cases I've ever heard." On December 9th, a judge at last settled the cremation versus burial debate. During that hearing, Carl Parker appeared in court by video conference, telling the judge he wanted his daughter to remain whole and that he planned to sell more of his belongings to help pay for her burial. He wanted to have a final resting place for Arabella so he could visit her. Samantha made her appearance in court by telephone, saying she was undecided on the matter. The judge told her she needed to make a decision on the spot, so she chose cremation. Mandy's lawyer argued that Carl, although Arabella's biological father, had been physically and emotionally separated from her due to his prison time. Carl responded by saying he had made every effort to be as involved in his daughter's life as possible from behind bars. Ultimately, the judge sided with Mandy, giving permission for Arabella to be cremated. Afterward, Mandy was interviewed outside the courthouse. About her niece, she said, "Her beautiful little smile on her face. She always lit up the room. Put up a good fight, but her little body just couldn't do it." About the decision to cremate Arabella, Mandy said, "It is a hard decision. This couldn't be an open casket anyway. Her body has been through so much, and not being embalmed and put in the freezer, cremation is just so much better." Mandy said Arabella's ashes would be separated, and Carl and his family would receive some of them. "It's a weight off. It's a weight off me. Now we can move forward and not be stuck in the same spot." Arabella's funeral was finally held on Saturday, December 28, 2019, at H2 Church in Sunbury. The service was performed by Pastor Mark Gittins. More than 50 friends and family members attended, most of them smiling through tears when a video was played showing baby Arabella smiling and happy as her dad, Carl, sang a modified version of the Oak Ridge Boys' hit song, Elvira. He had changed the lyrics for his daughter. I have a very short clip here, although the video shown at the funeral was longer.
Know that my Arabella's mine. Arabella.
It was the pastor's idea to play the song. After he saw the video, he very much wanted to play it during the service. The pastor said, "I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I was wondering why this funeral was so hard. I have done hundreds of funerals, but I realized this is a 3-year-old girl, and I don't have the words for this. This little girl was murdered. But at this time, we can't hate, but instead we need to love. We have come together as a community, and we will make sure that Arabella's voice will never go away. We will continue to fight child abuse, and we will make sure this doesn't happen again." Arabella's 21-year-old sister, Amanda, said afterward, "This was such a beautiful service." Arabella's maternal aunt, Lucinda Delcamp, said, "I knew Pastor Mark would do a great job. This was all so great." Mandy agreed. "It was very beautiful, and he did a wonderful job." Unfortunately, Arabella's cremation caused a major rift between Carl, who was still in prison, and Mandy. The new year brought new developments, both in the case and in the lives of the people involved. On January 3, 2020, Jahrid Burgess's court-appointed attorney, Jim Best, withdrew from the case due to a conflict and was replaced with Richard Fudale, who would from then forward represent Jahrid both in the murder case and for his robbery charges, from the incident that took place in 2018. On January 13th, Christy Willis's lawyer tried again to have her bail reduced. D.A. Matalevich again asked the judge to deny the request based on the charges against Christy. Judge Charles Saylor denied the request again, saying the charges were very serious, so Christy was ordered to remain in jail. Afterward, Christy said, "My whole life has changed. I have to worry about losing my car, my home, and my job." Later in January, Jahrid requested Judge Saylor grant him and his attorney access to Children and Youth Services records on Arabella. Defense attorney Mr. Fudale told the court that this was a he-said-she-said case, and his client wanted him to review the agency's records, to see a list of witnesses who would be called to testify against him, and to review Arabella's medical records. One reason they requested the CYS records is because they believed reports were made to CYS about Arabella being abused prior to Samantha and Jahrid even meeting. Judge Saylor ruled that the court should review the records before making a decision. In February, after he had done so, he ruled that the defense would be entitled to certain confidential files, ceding that they might want to use the information contained within. Also in January, the district attorney made the decision not to seek the death penalty in Jahrid's case, saying his aim was to keep publicity about the case to a minimum to reduce the possibility a judge would order the trial moved to another county. Matalevich had previously said that there were aggravating circumstances, including Arabella's age, that might allow him to seek the death penalty. Regardless, the last execution that took place in Pennsylvania was in 1999. Prior to his trial, Jahrid was held with no bail in Northumberland County Jail. Samantha was represented by attorney Michael Charles O'Donnell, Esquire. Until her trial, she was held in the Center County Prison, also without bail. Christy Willis was also held prior to her trial on $200,000 bail at Northumberland County Jail. Arabella Parker was released from prison in April 2020. In May, Pastor Mark Gittins, along with almost 80 other community leaders from across the state, wrote a letter to Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf and state legislative branches asking Governor Wolf to direct the Office of Advocacy and Reform to start collaborating with interdisciplinary and community-based stakeholders to develop and deploy child abuse and neglect prevention strategies. Pastor Gittins, who said he had only just begun to fight for children to be safe, told a reporter, "We want the Commonwealth to take leadership. Child abuse continues, and it is terrible. Our church still gets calls where the person has called and they aren't getting answers. People don't see what we are doing behind the scenes, and we haven't stopped working on this. We will keep our promise to be advocates to do this work in our communities." The family endured another tragic loss when Arabella's maternal grandmother, Bonnie Cayley, lost her husband. His obituary read, "Nicholas Cayley, 36, of Sunbury, passed away Sunday, December 27, 2020, after losing his ongoing battle with addiction. Nick was very fond of his step-grandkids. He enjoyed playing board games with them, and just making them laugh made him happy. He liked hanging out with friends and family, especially his stepdaughters, Sarah and Sam." Nick's foster mom, Rachel Cayley, who raised him, wrote a letter to the Daily Item soon afterward, saying, "I am the mother of Nicholas Cayley. I wish to ask anyone with addiction to please get help. Nick made some terrible choices in life that caused him to lose his. As his mother, all I wanted was for him to get off the streets and be safe. When I chose to give him a new life, I did so with hope. Now my only hope left is someday I will see him again in Jesus' arms. Addiction can be a means of self-medicating. Nick's life was difficult, to say the least. I give praise that he left a son to live on, hopefully becoming a caring, loving soul beyond his father's addiction. Know that Nick and I had pains that most mothers would never want to endure. All I wanted for Nick was to have a full life as a good father to his son and enjoy life. He needed accountability to make this happen, yet he wasn't able to do so. Please reach out to addicts to give them hope in our one and only Savior, Jesus." Now, time for a word from my sponsors. In February 2021, Northumberland County President Judge Charles H. Saylor oversaw a court hearing to entertain a defense motion to dismiss charges against 20-year-old Jahrid Joseph Burgess on the grounds that testimony at Jahrid's preliminary hearing was insufficient to support the charges. At the hearing, 25-year-old Samantha Delcamp appeared by video conference to provide testimony against Jahrid, who attended the hearing in person. Although news outlets had previously reported that Samantha was in negotiations with the prosecution, District Attorney Tony Matalevich asked Samantha during questioning if she was testifying because she had been promised anything in return by his office or by police. Samantha replied, "No, I am doing this because my daughter deserves justice." During her testimony, Samantha recounted several items she previously brought up in police interviews, saying Jahrid beat her 4 separate times from July through October 2019. She told the judge her then-boyfriend would get angry and punch her, kick her, and slap her in the face. She said Jahrid made her sit on the bed while he determined her punishment for failing to follow the rules he had set. She told the court, "He would pour soda over my head and spit in my face. He dumped soda over Arabella's head and he spit on her as well." Samantha admitted she lied to police during an interview while Arabella lay in the hospital on life support, saying, "I was scared of him. He told me if Arabella were to die to not worry about it because we would have another baby." Samantha testified that on the evening Arabella was fatally injured, Jahrid picked up the little girl and threw her 3 to 4 feet toward a couch, but instead Arabella landed on the floor, after which she began having a seizure. Jahrid, Samantha said, would not let her call 911, and the call was made almost an hour later when Jahrid's mother, Christy Willis, arrived. At that time, she said, it was agreed that Christy would say she was present but in another room when Arabella's seizure began, when in truth she was at her own home several miles away. Trooper Brian Siebert testified, reading from one of Arabella's doctor's reports, which mentioned 44 injuries the child had suffered and stated that some of her injuries were up to 8 weeks old. The untreated injuries, the doctor said, would have caused Arabella severe pain. Prosecutor Matalevich assured the court that his case wasn't centered around Samantha. In his recorded police interview, the video of which was played for Judge Saylor at the hearing, Jahrid admitted to police that he hit and threw Arabella. Mr. Matalevich said he was ready to proceed to trial, but Jahrid's public defender, Mr. Fewdale, said the defense would file other pretrial motions before a jury could be selected. At the conclusion of the hearing, Judge Saylor struck down the motion to dismiss, ruling that Jahrid's case would indeed proceed to trial. On Monday, April 12, 2021, jury selection began for the trial of Jahrid's mother, 51-year-old Christy Lynn Willis, who was accused of lying to police about the timing of the incident that caused Arabella's death. During 2 police interviews, according to Trooper Siebert, Christy falsely told investigators that she was sitting at the kitchen table in Jahrid and Samantha's rental home in Trevorton, Pennsylvania, on October 10, 2019, when Arabella, who was eating a sandwich, fell to the ground in the throes of a seizure, gasping for air. Later in the interview, Christy admitted she was not in the home when Arabella's seizure began. Christy, who made the 911 call, sounded cool, calm, and collected, according to court documents. If she had acted with more urgency, said Prosecutor Matalevich, there was a chance Arabella could have recovered from her injuries. Christy's trial began on Wednesday, April 14, 2021, before Judge Hugh Jones. Dr. Paul Bellino testified, saying that when Arabella was brought by ambulance to Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, medical staff was not notified about her injuries and were instead told she suffered a seizure. If they had been aware of Arabella's abuse, Dr. Bellino said, she would have had a greater chance of survival. Dr. Bellino testified, "Had we known what happened, we would have been able to provide all of the care we could offer her immediately." The brutal beatings Arabella endured caused dozens of injuries, which Dr. Bellino described in detail on the stand. Another witness for the prosecution was Samantha Delcamp herself, who testified that she was aware of Arabella's abuse for at least 3 months but did not report it, avoiding children and youth caseworkers by borrowing Christy's vehicle. She testified that Christy knew the reason Samantha was borrowing her vehicle, and that Jahrid arranged for Samantha and Arabella not to be home whenever a caseworker was scheduled to visit their home. The reason she did not report the abuse, Samantha told the court, was because she was afraid of Jahrid. Regarding the evening of Arabella's fatal injuries, Samantha told the court that she was filling the dishwasher on the evening of October 10, 2019, when Jahrid left the kitchen to see if Arabella was eating, as she sat at a little table in another room. When he found she wasn't, Samantha testified, he picked up the little girl and pinned her to the wall. Samantha said she attempted to intervene, at which point Jahrid pushed her away and threw Arabella 3 to 4 feet toward the couch, but only the bottom half of her body landed on the couch. Arabella's head, Samantha said, hit the floor. Arabella then stood up and promptly collapsed in a seizure. Jahrid, she told the court, refused to let her call 911, eventually calling his mother instead, who was a home health aide. Christy arrived shortly thereafter, but waited about 30 minutes to call 911. Samantha testified that outside the hospital on October 11th, she overheard Christy telling her son not to worry because she would lie to police about being in the home and witnessing Arabella having a seizure. A CYS caseworker testified that was the story she was told, and Trooper Siebert repeated his previous testimony about Christy's conflicting stories. Christy's defense attorney, William Cannon, argued that Christy didn't lie and didn't change her story, other than a few words here and there. At the time of her interview on October 11, 2019, he insisted, his client had been awake for many hours with no sleep. Prosecutor Matalevich countered this by saying Christy had arrived at the Stonington police barracks of her own volition for her first interview. The defense presented no witnesses, and after closing arguments on the morning of April 15th, it took the jury less than an hour to return with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Christy's bail was revoked, and she was returned to the Northumberland County Jail to await sentencing. As Christy was led from the courthouse the same day, she covered her face, telling reporters, "I am innocent. You are only getting one side. You all aren't hearing the full story." Christy's attorney, William Cannon, said, "She doesn't believe the jury heard all the facts. We will not discuss what we will do as far as an appeal." District Attorney Matalevich said he was pleased with the verdict, saying, "We want to thank the jury for their service. I also want to commend Trooper Brian Siebert for an outstanding job in investigating this case. Christy was handed a maximum sentence of 20 months to 17 years in state prison for her role in Arabella's death. Shortly afterward, she filed a motion for a new trial, saying she should have been granted a change of venue due to the large amount of news coverage by the Sunbury Daily Item, which she called sensational, inflammatory, slanted toward conviction, and saturated the community, affecting public opinion of her. In August, Northumberland County Judge Hugh Jones denied Christy's appeal, saying no jurors were prejudiced at the time of jury selection. In October 2021, Christy appealed her conviction to the Superior Court on the grounds of insufficient evidence and being denied a change of venue. In July 2022, her sentence was affirmed. Meanwhile, just days after Christy's trial ended, the Daily Item reported that Arabella's father, 45-year-old Carl Parker, was arrested and charged with misdemeanor flight to avoid apprehension, accidents involving damage to a vehicle or property, driving under the influence, careless driving, and driving with his license suspended. At 2:48 a.m. on Sunday, April 21, 2021, Carl reportedly struck the vehicle of a woman delivering newspapers, pushing the woman's vehicle 20 feet into someone's yard and rolling his own vehicle onto its side. According to the woman, Carl crawled out of his vehicle and ran off toward the bridge heading into Northumberland. When he was arrested the same morning, he refused to speak to police, saying he was invoking the Fifth Amendment. Carl, who had recently been released from prison for his last DUI conviction, was booked into Northumberland County Jail with his bail set at $50,000. In early October, he pleaded guilty, and in December, he was sentenced to up to 6 months in prison. He was released on parole in early 2022. Also in April 2021, Samantha Delcamp and her public defender, Michael O'Donnell, filed a motion for bail modification, which was opposed by D.A. Matalevich, although he did say Samantha had been cooperating with the prosecution in the murder case against Jahrid Burgess and had agreed to testify against him even without a plea agreement being reached. Samantha's request for bail was denied in May, when Judge Saylor said that by law he could not grant a request because anyone charged with capital crime or who faced the possibility of life without parole if convicted could not be granted bail. Mr. Matalevich only stated that he agreed with the court that bail was not an option. Samantha appeared at the motion hearing by video but did not speak. In July, Jahrid Burgess spoke by telephone with Francis Scarcella of the Daily Item in an interview he himself requested by mail. In the resulting article, Jahrid was reported as saying he wished Arabella herself could tell the story of what happened on the evening of October 10, 2019. He also said he wanted to go to trial immediately and that he was willing to accept responsibility for not telling investigators and medical staff what really happened that night, although, of course, he did not admit responsibility for Arabella's injuries. He said both he and Samantha knew the truth of what happened. Jahrid was quoted as saying, "Why didn't she tell them what happened when she was there? I will take accountability for my part, but why won't she? It was a scary situation at the hospital, and I was 19 years old. I'll take accountability for what I have done. Why won't she? Why is she pointing at me? She's playing the innocent one, but we will see at trial. She knows what she did, and I know what I did. We are ready to cross-examine her, and we have eyewitnesses to the abuse. There is no proof I beat that kid. Is a kid getting thrown into a couch getting beat to death?" He also said, "I am 100% ready to go to trial. Not 99%, but 100%. I want to go to trial on this right now." As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Paul Bellino testified at Christy Willis's trial, saying if doctors had been told the truth about Arabella's abuse, her possibility of survival would have been greater. Jahrid said in his interview, "I can't believe him. I have 3 different statements from another doctor and a coroner." As for his mother, Jahrid claimed Christy was falsely convicted. Whether or not he would testify in his own defense was still up in the air, Jahrid said. "It's being discussed. I just encourage people to come to this trial and hear the truth about what happened." Jahrid even commented on Arabella, saying, "I miss her. I sleep with a picture of her and me together every night." I'll pause here for another sponsor break. On Monday, November 15, 2021, from a pool of 225 potential jurors, a jury of 7 men and 5 women was chosen to determine whether or not 21-year-old Jahrid Burgess would be convicted of the multiple charges against him. Jahrid sat at the defense table wearing dress pants and a white polo shirt and accompanied by his defense attorney, Richard Fudale, who asked Northumberland County President Judge Charles Saylor to disallow testimony during the trial, stating that Jahrid had a history of abusing Arabella. District Attorney Tony Matalevich objected, telling the court that the case against Jahrid hinged on proving a course of abusive conduct against the 3-year-old. Fortunately, Judge Saylor said the testimony would be allowed and the defense's objections would be addressed at trial. The trial itself began on Tuesday, November 16, 2021 at 9:15 a.m. with opening arguments in which the district attorney told the jury that Jahrid Burgess was responsible for the brutal beating death of 3-year-old Arabella Margaret Parker. According to Francis Scarcella's coverage in the Daily Item, Burgess was very active in the courtroom during the trial's opening Tuesday morning. He regularly whispers to his attorney, takes notes, and instructed Fudale as witnesses took the stand Tuesday morning. Those witnesses included 3 state troopers who all said that Jahrid changed his story multiple times about what happened to Arabella the night she was fatally injured. On Tuesday afternoon, Samantha Delcamp took the stand. Mr. Matalevich previously told the court that Samantha was testifying despite no plea agreement between her defense and the prosecution being reached. Samantha's testimony lasted for nearly 3 hours, and Mr. Scarcella reported, at times, she wept as she looked at pictures of her daughter. Several times during Mr. Fudale's questioning of Samantha and the other witnesses earlier in the day, Jahrid interrupted his attorney, saying loudly, "Fudale, come here." Between flipping through hundreds of pages of documents, Jahrid frequently stood up from the defense table, pointing at his attorney and telling him what questions to ask. It's no surprise the man is a control freak, but I can't imagine it helped his case much to display it like that before the jury and the judge. Also in Samantha's testimony, she claimed Jahrid beat her so badly while she was pregnant with his baby that she miscarried. Evidently, the testimony about the pregnancy was a surprise to both Jahrid and his attorney, who objected, saying this was the first they had heard of the pregnancy, and they had not received any documentation to back up Samantha's claims. Judge Saylor told the jury to disregard Samantha's statements about the pregnancy. One more allegation Samantha made on the stand was especially disturbing if true. In addition to Jahrid's regular beatings of herself and Arabella, one bizarre punishment she claimed he enacted on them was to make both Samantha and her daughter walk around the living room naked with their hands in the air after being beaten. When questioned by the prosecutor, who asked if she was offered any deals or been pressured into testifying, Samantha said, "No, I want to do this so no one else gets hurt." On Wednesday, the jury heard from medical staff as well as law enforcement. First, the neurosurgeon who removed part of Arabella's brain, Dr. Alejandro Buggerini of Geisinger Medical Center, testified, saying the defendant's honesty about Arabella's injuries could possibly have saved her life. If it was stated from the get-go, we could have been more prompt in treating her. Minutes and seconds matter. This was a devastating injury. Dr. Buggerini testified that the right side of Arabella's brain had died due to swelling and bleeding that doctors were unable to control, and that an injury of that type and severity was impossible to incur from a simple fall due to a seizure. Also on the stand that day was Dr. Paul Bellino, who had testified at Jahrid's preliminary hearing. Dr. Bellino said, "Had we known earlier, we would have taken a different approach and taken her to the nearest hospital before flying her to Danville. We would have had every member of a care team available and ready." Trooper Brian Siebert and former Trooper Corporal Rob Reeves also took the stand, testifying to their belief that Jahrid had beaten Arabella on the day she received her head injury. On Thursday, Jahrid himself took the stand, telling the court he did hit Arabella as discipline. "I smacked her, but not hard or excessive, maybe 5 times. He admitted to kicking Arabella, but not with all of his strength. He also admitted he tapped the little girl in the face and hit her in the butt at times. When she wasn't eating on the night of October 10th, he said, he grabbed her by the shoulders, and he also admitted to throwing her onto her foam couch. "I didn't forcibly throw her to hurt her, but I should have walked her the extra couple of steps to put her on the couch. A misthrow is a misthrow, but accidents happen. I am embarrassed, but I didn't mean to hurt this child. I have to live with it every day. I love and miss Arabella." When Mr. Matalevich questioned him about bruises on Arabella's body, Jahrid said he didn't cause them and instead believed the bruises were caused by EMS and by doctors during surgery. Jahrid's manner on the stand was confrontational and even aggressive when responding to questioning by Mr. Matalevich. This exchange happened at one point. Jahrid: I don't know what you're trying to get me to say. DA: Are you saying that 3 state troopers and 2 doctors lied under oath? Jahrid: Yes. He tried to tell the court that police pressured him into making false admissions, although the video-recorded police interview proved otherwise. Telling the jury he still grieved for Arabella, he said, I didn't plan for her to die. I hope she forgives me. I pray to her and God every night to forgive me. I did not intend to do this. Samantha took the stand for a second time on Thursday, testifying again that Jahrid hit Arabella while Mr. Feudale tried to make her admit she was lying. Arabella's father, Carl Parker, was also called to testify. At the time, Carl was still in jail on DUI and other charges. When Carl entered the courtroom, he stared down Jahrid all the way to the witness stand. Jahrid never even glanced at him. Part of me just can't help wishing Carl could have even a minute alone in a room with the little weasel who called his actions that caused Arabella's death a misthrow. I doubt Carl would need much longer than that to get his point across. The defense's closing arguments on Thursday included Mr. Feudale telling the jury that Samantha was a liar and implying he didn't believe she hadn't worked with the prosecution on a plea deal for her testimony. Here's a nauseating detail for you. While Mr. Matalevich gave the prosecution's closing arguments, Mr. Feudale sat at the defense table and rubbed Jahrid's shoulders. During his closing argument, Mr. Matalevich told the jury that Jahrid's combination of beating, waiting, and lying constituted murder. Jahrid Burgess had a motive for this child to die. His narrative switched to his own self-interest at that moment when he was presented with different evidence each and every time. As to why Jahrid waited almost an hour to allow a 911 call to be placed, he knew the jig was up and he was going to be going to jail. He knew he was in serious trouble if Arabella went to the hospital, because they would see the bruises from the beatings she received. He also mentioned that Samantha is no angel, and that the district attorney's office did not make any deals with her and did not intend to. The jury deliberated for about an hour and a half on Thursday before returning with a verdict, finding 21-year-old Jahrid Joseph Burgess guilty of felony charges of third-degree murder, aggravated assault on a person under 6, child endangerment, obstruction, and 2 counts of aggravated assault on a person under 13, as well as 2 misdemeanors, simple assault and reckless endangerment. He was found not guilty of 1 felony count of aggravated assault and 1 misdemeanor count of simple assault. While his verdict was read, Jahrid stared straight ahead, while Arabella's family exchanged hugs of relief. Mandy Kegler told the reporter, "This is justice for Arabella. We are pleased with the results and thank the jury." Carl's older daughter, Arabella's big sister Amanda, said, "This is absolutely some justice for my sister. I am very happy we were able to get this result and some justice for Arabella." Judge Saylor thanked the jury for its service and ordered Jahrid to remain in jail on $750,000 bail until he was sentenced. He faced up to 40 years in prison on just the murder conviction. The judge would decide if the combined penalties for the other charges would run consecutively or concurrently. Defense attorney Feudale said he was unsure if they would appeal the verdict. Mr. Matalevich said, "I am very pleased with the jury. The state police did a very thorough investigation. The state police built an extremely powerful case and collected enormous amounts of evidence. The jury sat here for 4 days, and that's a big ask. It's difficult." Just to clear up the murder charge, Pennsylvania is one of only 3 states, including Minnesota and Florida, where third-degree murder is a valid charge. According to the prosecution in this case, a charge of third-degree homicide means the person showed extreme indifference to the value of human life, knowing their actions were dangerous but committing them anyway and causing a person's death. First-degree murder requires elements of maliciousness and premeditation, whereas second-degree murder is committed during the commission of another felony. In January 2022, Jahrid appeared before President Judge Charles Saylor for his sentencing hearing. Defense attorney Richard Feudale asked the judge to give Jahrid a break because of his age, saying, This was children raising children. Some are good at it and some are not. Jahrid read a statement to the court saying, I take 100% responsibility for what happened to Arabella. I ask Arabella, God, and the people of Northumberland County to forgive me. You all don't have to, but I owe this to you. Arabella will remain in my mind and dreams. Judge Saylor then sentenced Jahrid to the maximum of 24 to 50 years in prison, saying, You didn't care about that child's well-being. You subjected that child to your twisted discipline, and I will sentence you to the maximum allowed by law. The last defendant to go to trial was Arabella's mother, Samantha Delcamp, whose 2-day trial began in May 2022. True to his word, prosecutor Tony Matalevich did not offer Samantha a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony at Jahrid or Christy's trials. Samantha sobbed when the court was shown graphic photos of Arabella's injuries and cried throughout much of the witness testimony. A former Pennsylvania state trooper, Robert Reeves, testified that Samantha told him she initially lied about the circumstances surrounding Arabella's injuries to protect everyone. Geisinger pediatrician Dr. Paul Bellino testified that some of Arabella's injuries were in the healing stage, indicating they were suffered well before her fatal brain injury. Because the emergency call initially reported Arabella was having a seizure and didn't mention head trauma, the doctor said, this prevented medical personnel at the hospital from being better prepared to treat a more serious injury. He also cited the 49-minute delay between Arabella's injury and Christy Willis's 911 call as a major contributor to her death. Prosecutor Matalevich told the jury during closing arguments that Samantha chose her boyfriend over her child. The beating, lying, and waiting are what killed Arabella. You can't just stand there like a deer in headlights because you are scared. She chose her boyfriend over the health, wellness, and safety of her own child. She chose to let the child die. She failed to perform the legal duty as a parent. On May 12, 2022, after 2 hours of jury deliberation, Samantha was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, aggravated assault, and endangering the welfare of children. She cried while the verdict was read. After the verdict, Samantha's sister, Mandy Kegler, told reporter Frances Scarcella, As a mother, you were supposed to do everything in your power to protect your child, and she failed Arabella. It doesn't matter how scared you are of that person. You do everything in your power to get out. I hope she thinks every day about the choices she made, how she failed Arabella, and honestly, herself. Arabella's sister, Arabella Parker, said, I am glad justice was served. I think about my sister every day and how this should have never happened. I hope Samantha thinks about this every day while she serves her sentence. At her sentencing hearing in September 2022, Judge Saylor admonished Samantha about her treatment of Arabella, saying, I saw pictures of her in the hospital, and it was heartbreaking. You criminally failed to protect your daughter, and that you stayed with Jahrid Burgess. He then sentenced Samantha to spend 12 to 25 years in prison. Jahrid Burgess appealed his sentence, but his appeal was denied in November 2022, the same month Samantha filed a motion for a new trial. Her motion was denied on December 30th of the same year. Jahrid appealed to the Pennsylvania Superior Court, but that was denied in October 2023. Christy Willis is serving her sentence in the Pennsylvania State Correctional Institute at Muncie. Jahrid is currently incarcerated at SCI Albion, and Samantha was sent to SCI Cambridge Springs. I'll pause here for one final sponsor break. Arabella's adult half-sister, Amanda, provided testimony at Jahrid's trial and has been a big part of Arabella's story all along. That's why I was especially disappointed to learn that on Wednesday, February 8, 2023, 24-year-old Amanda Lynn Parker was arrested and charged with a felony count of endangering the welfare of children. She is accused of providing inaccurate information and being purposefully dishonest with medical staff at Evangelical Community Hospital in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, in regard to her own daughter's head injury. According to a probable cause affidavit, on January 26th, medical staff contacted police, informing Watsontown Patrolman David Podgorny that Amanda's 6-month-old daughter was in critical condition due to a skull fracture and was about to be airlifted to Geisinger Medical Center, the same hospital where Arabella died. Amanda told hospital staff that her baby girl hit her head while sitting in her bouncy seat, and despite the baby's head swelling at the injury site, she dropped the baby off with her babysitter at 9 a.m. anyway. Police interviewed the babysitter, Jasmine Norman of West Milton, who initially told Officer Podgorny that she noticed the baby's swelling worsening, took her to the hospital, and then informed Amanda what was going on. When confronted about the statement being inaccurate, the babysitter admitted that in fact, Amanda asked her to take the baby to the hospital so Amanda wouldn't get in trouble. Text messages showed the two women talking about lying to medical staff about the baby's injury. As it turned out, Amanda's timeline was false. Jasmine told police that on the afternoon of January 26th, Amanda called her and asked her to take the baby to the hospital. When she arrived at Amanda's house, both Amanda and the father of both of her children, 36-year-old Ernest Reynolds III, were there. Jasmine said that when she arrived, Ernest left for work despite his younger daughter's condition. The affidavit stated that Amanda and Jasmine's statements contradicted, and that in text messages, Amanda told Jasmine that the baby fell off a bed, but "She is fine. I had her checked." However, representatives from Children and Youth Services, or CYS, told Officer Podgorny that the baby had missed several scheduled pediatrician appointments, and Amanda apparently later told Jasmine she hadn't taken the baby for medical treatment for the head injury. Ernest Reynolds III was charged with felony child endangerment. He led police on a manhunt for over a month before he was captured by U.S. Marshals, and he's currently awaiting trial in SCI Huntingdon. Amanda was held in Northumberland County Jail on a bond of $75,000 until April of the same year when she posted bond and was released. As it turns out, the same week she was charged with child endangerment, Amanda was also hit with 4 separate misdemeanor drug charges, including manufacturing a controlled substance, use or possession of drug paraphernalia, and intentional possession of a controlled substance. Ernest also received similar drug charges for the same incident. Both Amanda's drug case and her child endangerment case were scheduled for trial in February 2024, but it appears the two cases are separate because Amanda pleaded no contest to her child endangerment charge and was scheduled for sentencing on April 8th, but due to some confusion over the terms of her plea agreement, it has since been postponed. The drug case is still active. As always, I'll provide updates on my Facebook page as I get them. Now, let's go back for a moment to Arabella's mother, Samantha. In July 2023, her defense attorney, Michael C. O'Donnell, filed an appeal with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, raising several issues. One of these issues was an accusation against then District Attorney Tony Matalevich of acting in an unethical manner to obtain a conviction, saying the DA presented different versions of the events that caused Arabella's death at each of the 3 defendants' trials. Assistant District Attorney David G. Albertson responded, asking the court to deny Samantha's appeal and affirm her conviction, mostly by sticking to the trial record and Judge Saylor's post-sentence opinion, in which he said, "The theory of battered women syndrome didn't apply to the facts of the case, so expert testimony on that topic would be inadmissible. The issue of prosecutorial misconduct was not raised at trial and was therefore waived. The jury was given proper instructions on the duty of a parent to protect a child. Photos of Arabella in the hospital were necessary for jurors to see the extent of her injuries. Jury selection followed Northumberland County's usual practice, and the weight of the evidence supported Samantha's verdicts, and her sentence was within the standard range under state guidelines." Samantha's Supreme Court appeal is still pending, and I'm very interested to see the outcome. I do believe she deserved to be convicted of some of her charges, but the longer I followed the story, the more empathy I felt toward her. At the very least, I think she was treated too harshly by some, including, and especially, Steve Wilkos. Samantha's appearance on that show was a flat-out ambush. Yes, Samantha was aware that Jahrid was abusing both herself and Arabella. No, she did not seek help. She lied to various authorities and family members during the relationship, and she lied to medical staff and investigators after Arabella was fatally injured. Still, the fact that Samantha ultimately wasn't allowed to be evaluated by a domestic abuse expert is concerning to me. In 2023, Emily Small, a junior staff member at the American University Law Review, wrote a 39-page comment titled "Beyond Duress," supporting the admissibility of evidence of battered woman syndrome to aid the defenses of battered mothers charged with failing to protect their children against their common abuser. I'll quote the abstract to give you the gist of it. Samantha Delcamp's abusive boyfriend killed her 3-year-old daughter, Arabella. Even though Samantha never laid a hand on her daughter, she was charged with involuntary manslaughter for failing to protect her from her abusive boyfriend. During her trial, Samantha's lawyer was barred from introducing evidence of battered woman syndrome to help explain to the jury why Samantha didn't stop her boyfriend from hurting Arabella. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident. Numerous women have been charged with failing to protect their children from harm at the hands of their common abuser and have not been able to introduce evidence on battered woman syndrome to aid the jury in understanding what happened. This comment argues that there must be a widespread standard within our court system where judges always allow abused mothers charged with failing to protect their children to provide evidence of battered woman syndrome to aid their defense. Currently, there is a growing number of appellate courts that allow evidence of battered woman syndrome to be introduced in cases involving duress. In these decisions, courts have explained that evidence of battered woman syndrome can help the jury understand the reasonableness of the defendant's actions under the circumstances. This reasoning and analysis can be applied to a failure to protect context because reasonableness is a necessary element of both defenses. Furthermore, this comment examines how battered women who fail to come to the aid of their child when the child is being abused are often acting reasonably under the circumstances when considering the effects of battered woman syndrome. Allowing the admission of evidence of battered woman syndrome in cases involving child neglect or endangerment promotes justice in the American legal system by enabling juries to more fully assess a woman's reasonableness. As someone who has experienced domestic violence, and particularly coercive control myself, I absolutely understand how someone can feel helpless and stuck in a situation like that. It's hard for anyone who hasn't lived through it to imagine the way this kind of treatment chips away at your self-esteem, your independence, your ability to think rationally and reasonably, and your sense of self. I'm not saying I believe Samantha deserves to get off scot-free, or that she doesn't bear some responsibility. All I'm saying is that it's worth considering that Samantha was allegedly under the thumb of an abusive little twerp who controlled everything she said and did by creating a culture of terror in their household. The Crime Wire wrote a very thoughtful piece about the subject called Arabella Parker, Samantha Delcamp, and the Domestic Violence Debate. In that article, reporter Rosanna Clarkson wrote, "In the wake of this tragic and heartbreaking situation, it is clear that demanding victims of domestic violence simply leave their abusive relationships is not enough. A societal shift that centers around education, accountability, and empathy is urgently needed. It starts with comprehensive education in public schools that empowers youths to recognize the signs of abuse and to understand healthy relationships. It then continues with holding abusers 100% accountable for their actions and providing support and resources for survivors. Most importantly, it requires an end to victim-blaming attitudes and a collective effort to uplift and empower those who have experienced the trauma of domestic abuse. As we look forward, it is crucial that we not only stand with the survivors, but actively work toward a world where no one has to endure the agony caused by domestic violence. We must advocate for change, support those in need, and foster a culture of understanding and compassion. Together, we can create a future where every individual feels safe, valued, and free from the cycle of abuse." I could not agree more. Finally, one more thing to note. During the November 2023 election, Samantha's defense attorney, Michael O'Donnell, won the Northumberland County District Attorney spot over Tony Matalevich after accusing Matalevich of unethical behavior in an unrelated police brutality case. O'Donnell took office in January 2024. Now that we're reaching the end of the episode, I want to talk about Arabella for a moment, because she as a person seemed to get a little bit lost amidst the fighting and accusations and details of the crimes committed against her. Arabella Margaret Parker didn't speak much, but she knew how to get her point across. She loved playing on playgrounds. She was a fan of all flavors of ice cream, and she loved animals and giving hugs and kisses. From her obituary, Arabella was a blessing and brought so much joy to our lives. She was silly, fun, and loving. She was always so excited when she got to visit family members. She loved her family, her baby dolls, and her white with pink polka dot blanket. She loved to be sung to and would shake her little body to the beat. She was always the center of attention. Arabella only lived for 3 years, but this beautiful little red-haired girl deserves to be remembered as the joyful, loving soul she was. Rest well, Arabella. I hope you know how very loved you are. Next week, you'll hear my conversations with 3 people close to the case, including the reporter who followed Arabella's story from the start, and her aunts Mandy and Sarah. My sources for today's episode were the same as last week: the Sunbury Daily Item, Fox 56, WKOK, Penn Live Patriot News, Facebook, the Milton Standard Journal, the Pennsylvania Unified Judicial System portal, and the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections website. Shoutouts to my newest patrons. Thank you so much to Jade P. from Knoxville, Tennessee, Angela T. from Danville, Indiana, Tanya A. from Jacksonville, Texas, Bridget or Brigitte B. from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, Chantel W. from Gresham, Oregon, and from Mayberry, thank you to Grace K. I appreciate all of my patrons more than I can tell you. To help support the show, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod or ko-fi.com/stlcpod. That's it for this episode. Join me next week for part 3 of Arabella's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.